Hello and welcome to Newsdesk. I'm Biresh Banerjee.
And I'm Alex Forrest-Whiting.
Now, for nearly a year now, ties between India and Bangladesh have been following a downward trajectory. It's hardly been a regular headline story, but it's a major one nonetheless.
Yeah, things have been so serious that last December, a Hindu mob entered the premises of the Bangladesh Assistant High Commission in Agartala in northeast India and vandalised it. The reason? Well, the earlier arrest of a Hindu monk in Bangladesh on charges of sedition.
And that's really been the entire story of this whole downward spiral in ties, a series of tit-for-tat actions between both countries that have pushed relations to rock bottom. The question is, why? It's what we're discussing today on Newsdesk.
Yeah, so helping us do that, we will have two guests, one from India and one from Bangladesh, who have followed the trajectory of this downward spiral. And we'll also have Jared Reid, who is going to be taking your questions and comments in the chat and helping me bring them into the discussion. Before we get to that, though, you've also got a poll for us.
I do have a poll, and hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. The poll question is, what do you think the first step to better India-Bangladesh ties is? India, number one, extradites the former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, who Biresh is going to talk about in a minute. Number two, minorities would be safer, should be safer in Bangladesh. Number three, economic ties, so deeper economic ties. And number four, none of the above, because you think relations have been permanently damaged. So please do let us know what you think via the poll. Please do also send in your questions and your comments today, and I'll do my best to give those over to Biresh and to Alex and to also our guests too.
Thank you very much, Jared. And we have asked this question on our community post, and we've already had some comments. So I'll just read some of those just to give you a taster and also to encourage you to put your questions and comments into the chat so we can hopefully put some of those to our guests later. Here's a sample. We've had Summer saying it's time for India to do the right thing and send back that corrupt ex-Bangladeshi PM to stand trial. Atrupa T4Z says it is in India and Bangladesh's interest to have good relations. A functional democracy in Bangladesh is the only way. And then this from Gaurav Avdas. It's a little bit, well, it's certainly unedited. Some of you may find it a bit controversial, but I want to read it out in full. We Indians are waiting for a stable elected government in Bangladesh. Until then, the relationship is likely to remain tense because the present illegal government doesn't have the people's mandate and are enforced by radicals and foreign powers. India wants a stable relationship with Bangladesh. We're both countries and have secure borders, stable connectivity and trade relations, which benefits both nations. And then just one more, which has just come in on this live chat. It's from Aditya, who says, actually, we have now hit a dead end with India supporting Sheikh Hasina and her government. People became agitated because India's overreach in its affairs and legal bodies like bureaucracy and the army. And now any new government in Bangladesh will always have to maintain a safe distance, fearing backlash from Bangladeshis. People will see closeness between any government in Dhaka and India with hostility. So just a taste there of some of the comments coming in. And as I said, please do put some more of them into the chat and we will get to them later.
There's a lot in there, isn't there? I mean, there's a lot of talking points there. There's a whole lot of comment. I mean, not everything there is a statement of fact, but it's something that we can pass through in this discussion that we will have. But first, I mean, how did all this begin? Now, it began with the fall of a particular woman and her government. We're talking about Sheikh Hasina. That's her. She's the former Prime Minister of Bangladesh. She was forced out of power on the 5th of August last year. Now, students and the general public, that's on the 5th of August, entered her residence. They had been demanding her resignation for weeks upon weeks in street protests. Sheikh Hasina fled to India and has been in India since then. India has so far refused to hand her over to Bangladesh, which has accused her of crimes against humanity, amongst other crimes. Those were the images from the 5th of August last year when that government fell. Meanwhile, India has accused Bangladesh of failing to prevent attacks on Hindu minorities since Hasina fled. Now, Bangladesh has said that these concerns are overrated. So essentially, when it comes to India and Bangladesh, that is the crux of the disagreement between the two countries. Bangladesh wants Sheikh Hasina to return to face justice in Bangladesh. India is not commenting on it, and India is not sending Sheikh Hasina back. And India, in turn, accuses Bangladesh of failing to prevent attacks on minorities. And since then, over the past few months, there have been varying levels of tit-for-tat actions between both nations that have further made the atmosphere rather sour. And when we're talking about tit-for-tat actions, we're talking about actions when it comes to stopping trade at the border, actions when it comes to stopping the movement of people between India and Bangladesh. I mean, remember, India and Bangladesh have deep cultural, people-to-people contacts and trade and other political connections as well. On a daily basis, you basically have people from both sides of the border visiting each other. There are people with families on both sides, people on both sides, at least in the Indian state of West Bengal and Bangladesh, they speak the same language, they understand each other. So this is a relationship that has existed for a number of years. And
is it worth just showing a map? Now, is this too early to bring it in, or just to give people a picture of what it looks like? This is a map from, if you can just share my screen. This is from pre-1971, but just to show you, so the green here, this is Pakistan, and this was considered East Pakistan. This is what became Bangladesh just here. So you can see, for those of you who don't know the region, I'm sure many of you do, but for those of you who don't, you can just see how it is surrounded by India all the way around, and that is why they have such a particularly close relationship.
And again, just to reiterate, that is a map from 1971, when that area where the cursor is currently was known as East Pakistan. It was officially a part of Pakistan. It is only at the end of 1971, after the Bangladesh War of Independence, that East Pakistan formally became known as Bangladesh, and modern Bangladesh came into existence. We intend to speak to two guests about the current state of relations between India and Bangladesh. And at the moment, we do have one guest who is joining us. Let's just introduce him. That is Professor Ali Riaz. Welcome, Professor Riaz. He teaches at Illinois State University in the US, but for the past few months, since October, if I'm not wrong, Professor, you've been in Dhaka, engaged in the reform process that Bangladesh is trying to undertake. You were initially with the Constitution Reform Commission, and now you're officially the Vice Chairman of the National Consensus Commission, which, again, correct me if I'm wrong, Professor, is tasked with talking to various political parties to determine political reforms that the country needs to undertake. Have I got all that right so far, Professor Riaz?
You did. Thank you. It's great to be with you. It's an opportunity to talk. So you are absolutely right in introducing me, and thank you for that generous introduction.
Can you, while we're waiting for another one of our guests to join from India, can you just give us a brief on what exactly is the function that you're carrying out as part of the National Consensus Commission, and what exactly is it all building up to?
The National Consensus Commission is headed by Professor Yunus, who is the chief advisor. I've been tasked to be the vice chair, and with 5 other members of this commission. This commission has been set up as a follow-up to the reform commissions that were established in last September. Between September and February 2025, 6 commissions, that is Constitution Reform Commission, Electoral System Reform Commission, Judiciary Reform Commission, Anti-Corruption Reform Commission, Police Reform Commission, and Public Administration Reform Commissions. They worked and came up with a set of recommendations. Then, with the members of these commissions, head of these commissions to begin with, and some members, Professor Yunus appointed this Consensus Commission, which started operating on 15th of February this year. Our task is, based on the reform recommendations by these 6 commissions, we are trying to, as our name suggests, is to build a consensus among political parties as to which of these reform recommendations would be implemented. Right. Some of them are immediate, which government has started. Some would be in a short term, but also some of them would be in a longer term perspective, say, for example, the constitution, changes in the constitution, reforming the constitution. So at this point, we are in the second round of conversation with the political parties. 30 political parties are participating. We provided them with 166 recommendations, which was collected, basically put together from the 6 reform commissions previously established. Now we're on the second round, as I mentioned. Right. This is all the political parties are invited. We had 10 meetings so far, and our goal is to end the process with the national charter, which would be signed by the political parties as a commitment going forward. Whether they're in the government or they're in the opposition or simply part of the parliament or not, right, they would actually try to implement these recommendations.
And we'll come to you and talk to you a bit about how this process moves forward later on in the program. And I think I can promise you that we will not ask you to narrate all 166 recommendations, because that might take a bit of time. And let's just bring in our other guest who is joining us from India. We're joined by Professor Sreeradha Datta, who is from the OP Jindal Global University, which is in northern India, in Haryana. Professor Datta, like Professor Riaz, has also been on DW News before, so we are very pleased to welcome both of you to the discussion. Thank you for making it, both of you. If I can just begin with you first, Professor Datta. I was just giving a bit of a background to the community who were tuning in about where things stand between India and Bangladesh. And one of the bugbears in this entire relationship at the moment has been the Bangladeshi demand that that Sheikh Hasina be extradited, be returned to Bangladesh, and India not committing on that return. The question is, why? Why doesn't India return Sheikh Hasina, who is wanted for crimes against humanity, to Bangladesh?
India is of the opinion that Bangladesh, under the present interim government, or even otherwise, is unlikely to, have fair trial. I don't think India is convinced of much of the allegations that, of course, Bangladesh has certainly made public, and it's, there is a bit of controversy from Indian point of view. Also, I think there hasn't been, and I would want to also understand, because yes, there was a request from Bangladesh, but I thought it wasn't really at a very high level. There are certain ways and measures and how you send in a request for extradition. I thought it was also at a very lower level kind of a request made, and I haven't in the last few months at all seen any request come in from at a higher administrative level. So I thought Bangladesh was also possibly holding back. Maybe they wanted to complete the trials. I haven't understood what was the issue, but it's a fact that while there has been absolutely no conversation on this particular matter between India and Bangladesh, but India will certainly be extremely reluctant to extradite her. I don't think that I have any, hesitation to say that.
Professor Riaz, is this a technical issue that Bangladesh hasn't made a proper representation for extradition?
No, I don't think it's a technical issue. As a matter of fact, the court process has started. Court has issued a warrant. It actually published an advertisement in the local press, as well as issued notices to international media that that is Sheikh Hasina, should actually surrender to the court. And she, on the other hand, currently is in India and using the YouTube and other social media platform to propagate hateful speeches. And since she has not appeared before the court, there is a contempt of court, which.
But an extradition request is another matter altogether, right? I mean, that's a separate process that's independent.
Absolutely, extradition matter has been processed. As a matter of fact, this is a process that has been started. Mm-hmm. So I don't know how that would be described as a low-level communication. If the Indian government expects that chief advisor would actually call and ask for extradition. That is something we need to understand. That's not going to happen, despite the fact that, as a matter of fact, when Professor Yunus met Prime Minister Narendra Modi, he did request that Indian government should stop her from using the social media for these hateful speeches and creating such incitement within Bangladesh, directing her followers, whom she considered as her followers, to engage in violence. So, but that was practically, literally turned down, and Prime Minister Modi said, "Oh, this is social media. We cannot stop her," despite the fact that they can.
Just for a bit of context,
this is a country. Look.
Just for a bit of context, sorry,
this is a country
I don't mean to interrupt you. Just for a bit of context, because you were talking about what Sheikh Hasina was saying, just wanted to sort of say that she was sitting in India, she's been sitting in India, and in one of her comments, she has accused Mohammed Yunus, who is the chief advisor to the government of Bangladesh. She's accused him of, quote, unleashing terrorists on his people. So that's one of the things that Sheikh Hasina has said, sitting in India. But go on, Professor Riaz. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just want sort of people to know what it is that you're talking about.
No, absolutely. No, this is India, where Indian government stopped social media in Kashmir for how many years? And yet they are making the argument they cannot stop Sheikh Hasina from using this social media platform to create violence in Bangladesh. And the one that you just mentioned about alleging that this is a terrorist, describing Professor Yunus for unleashing terrorists. Look, 1,400 people were killed in 3 weeks. And this is, I'm not making it up. This is a UN report we are talking about. And since then, almost a year has passed. Not a single statement regarding this, any remorse, any apology, not even acknowledgement that under her. And now, when we're talking, a verified audio by BBC has clearly shown that the then Prime Minister directed her forces for wanton.
I think we seem to be losing the connection with you, Professor Riaz. We'll try and re-establish that. I do believe we have lost it. We'll try and re-establish that. Yeah, but I just want to sort of go to Professor Datta just for an immediate response, because I think you wanted to come in on that, Professor Datta.
Yes, I mean, I do agree that she has been using the social media, inciting violence, constantly telling her supporters that she's coming back and taking over. But it's also a matter of fact that ever since the meeting that took place on the sidelines of BIMSTEC, and I think Professor Yunus had made a request to Prime Minister Modi, I have seen, I rather heard the tone, I mean, the frequency of former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's social media, deliberations. That hasn't come out. I'm sure there are many phone conversations which are often leaked between her and her, party members. But we haven't seen the usual format that she had used to address many of her, loyalists all over. So there has been a bit of toning down on that. But it's true that she has certainly been, liberally using the social media to propagate her own cause.
Let me just interject here, because you were talking, Professor Riaz, before we lost the connection with you. You were alluding to this leak, a leak of audio that the BBC had today. They were broadcasting it today and talking about it. Jared has put that article and that audio into the chat for anybody who wants to just check up on what he was alluding to, so that you are clear about that. But that was basically that the former Prime Minister of Bangladesh had made some had made some orders allegedly talking about being able to shoot some of the protesters last summer. So that is what we were talking about there. And I just want to come in with a couple of comments. Thank you to everybody who's putting comments in the chat. We have Nile Chaturvedi, who's been putting in lots of comments. Great to hear from you, Nile. This I thought was interesting. He says the ties will probably improve between India and Bangladesh once an elected government takes over post-elections 2026. As far as Sheikh Hasina is concerned, India will never extradite her, and realistic Bangladeshis know it. Very interested in your reaction to that, Professor Riaz. Do you believe that India will never extradite her?
Unfortunately, that might be true, but that actually shows that someone who has committed crimes against humanity is being given refuge, harbor. India is harboring someone who has committed crimes. Plain and simple.
It's not been proved as yet, Professor Riaz. Just to be clear, it's not been proved in a Bangladeshi court either.
For 16 years, if you look at the number of enforced disappearance, right? What does it say about it? That if you look at the extrajudicial killing, how do you actually not say that these are not crimes against humanity? Whether it's proven in the court, fine, extradite her. Let's see what happens. But when she fled, the way she has been treated by Indian government, not to mention the last 14 years, 15 years that she was in power, the relationship. Suddenly, India has become so interested in democracy and election in Bangladesh. Three elections, 2014, 18, 24. What did they say? It is internal matter of Bangladesh, right? That is what they said each and every time. Suddenly, it is now India's concern that there is not an elected government. How is that, how that is rationalized by Indian policymakers? I don't get it.
Maybe Professor Datta can come in on that.
This is not an elected...
Professor Datta, what is the thinking here? I mean, Sheikh Hasina is no longer a leader, and it is true what Professor Riaz is saying, because the last election, at least, was also boycotted by the opposition. What is the Indian justification here, then?
Essentially, I think the whole, the bilateral relations impinged on one particular issue, which is security and strategic matters. We've seen in the past that when it was a non-Awami League government in place in Dhaka, how India has suffered on that front. And, when Sheikh Hasina was ushered into the huge majority in December 2008, and she took over soon after January, even before there was a joint communique between the two neighbors, which took place almost a year and a half later, that she had addressed some very large outstanding issues of security concern. And it's not an unknown story. India has been constantly talking about that. There are many evidences that were, forwarded to the previous government, who pretended to ignore it, were in complete denial of those, facts and figures that India was sharing at that point of time. So once Sheikh Hasina took over, we've seen how she addressed it at her own level, and we've seen how things instantly, changed in terms of security atmosphere between the two neighbors. And of course, then line of credit from India flew, and all of the other bilateral, projects and everything came into place. But because of the previous government experience, which was the 2001 to 2006, I don't think India has ever suffered such security threats from the neighborhood, keeping Pakistan aside, ever from any of the neighbors, except for Bangladesh. And that was a very intense period at that point of time, despite the fact that, and I recall this very vividly, that I was part of about 5 parallel track 2 conversations that we were doing with several stakeholders in Bangladesh at point of time. We were also discussing a energy deal, as you recall, that Tata was trying to work, but nothing seemed to work because, there was a kind of a clear understanding which appeared finally that, BNP government was simply not interested in working with India. It came through very clearly. I mean, the business as usual model was kind of there, but the commerce relation didn't really take off. Nothing was working. But more importantly, the security was certainly which of deep concern to India. So and of course, course, let's not forget the fact that India and Awami League and Sheikh Hasina, it's a historical relationship that they've had. Those 5-6 years when Sheikh Hasina was unable to return home was when she spent her time in Delhi. So that also has, endeared her to many of the leaders. And in India, whether it's a Congress, whether it's a BJP, whether it's a left front, she has had a very good equation with every single across the spectrum. So that has been something which, unlike what India shares with the Bangladeshi leaders, it was always an Awami League leader who understood India's concern. So when this particular incident happened on 5th August, and she was here, of course, India would certainly give her shelter and would keep her. I think India was the main concern, and I do understand that has been almost limited communication between the interim and India, and many have, of course, raised this, point of view as to how Professor Yunus went to China first. But it's true that he did want to come to India, but India has not been, especially forthcoming on that. India is very reluctant to have proper conversations with the interim government because an Indian point of view was that interim government does not exist. It's an illegit government.
Let's try and address some of that. Let's try and address some of that. You brought up a lot of points. You brought up a lot of points. Let me just direct this in one. There's a lot you can say, I know, Professor Riaz, and there's a lot of points that Professor Datta brought up. Let's just bring up that particular point about security, right? Let's just stay with that for a moment. The 2001 to 2006 period is the BNP, Bangladesh National Party government, and it's a time, correct me if I'm wrong, Professor Riaz, when there was a coalition with the Jamaat-e-Islami, which is the largest Islamist party in Bangladesh, which had a ban under Sheikh Hasina. That ban has now recently been lifted. They're promising a giant rally on the 15th of July. So seeing from the Indian side point of view, irrespective of the fact that Sheikh Hasina, they are not acting on the extradition request, they see a security concern that, okay, what Sheikh Hasina was clamping down on is now going to be out in the public and will be a security threat for India. How does the interim government of Bangladesh see that concern?
First of all, the consideration that a bilateral relationship should be determined just because based on one single thing of security, is it Bangladesh's responsibility to ensure India's security? India has a large military, isn't it? And if you look at the border, the killings that we have seen in the border, and then Indian security apparatuses are quite capable of handling their problem. But a country leaving its everything aside, despite the fact that the legitimate concern of water sharing, border killing, having a respectful, dignified relationship, all should go down the drain because Bangladesh's responsibility is to ensure India's security, right? That is unacceptable. Plain and simple unacceptable.
I think the Indian point is that Bangladeshi soil not be used by extremists who can potentially enter India and cause mayhem. I think that's the point that India has made.
India has made that comment. There has been conversation. There have been other issues. Bangladesh can turn the table and say for more than a decade, the Chittagong Hill Tracks situation, India did harbor those secessionist movement there, didn't they? So it doesn't just, there are the other side of the coin too. We need to understand there is other side of the coin. And these are not too different. But the most important thing here, Bangladeshi people with a popular uprising made sure that an autocratic regime's downfall. And if the Indian government feels that it is an illegitimate government, look, this is the term that has been used even today, right? Even Professor Datta used that Indians feel that this is an illegitimate. Why should it be illegitimate government? People's expression, 3 elections and over the 15 years, the repression, we simply cannot wash them away and say, look, we can go into the details, how Indian Foreign Secretary came and twisted arms of a political party to make sure that there is an election, which is quote-unquote participatory when all the political parties boycotted. We can go ahead, for hours on this. That's not the point. The point is how Bangladesh has been treated. If Indian government feels that an individual by the name Sheikh Hasina, a family of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, and Bangladesh should be equated as if it is their property, there are 180 million Bangladeshis. Why they're choosing one individual over 180 million people? This is the choice they're making. This is absolutely a choice they made years ago. In 2014, in 2018, 2024. You refer to the last election boycotted by the opposition, right? What happened to the one they participated in 2018? It was an election where ballots were stuffed the night before. The point I'm trying to make, suddenly Delhi's point is that if there is an elected government, we'll talk. It is Bangladesh's choice whether how they are going to create their government. It should not be. Didn't they deal with other countries where there are situations like this? But just because one party that has been preferred by them, by the policymakers, irrespective of BJP or for that matter, fine. I mean, that's what they're telling us, that, okay, that is how it should be treated, an independent country. Is that the one? And then you were referring to, let me finish it, then you were referring to the Jamaat-Islami, right? The banning of Jamaat-Islami.
Yeah.
When it was banned when Sheikh Hasina was facing a popular uprising, and to divert the entire attention, they decided to ban Jamaat-Islami.
Okay.
So as if it is a credential of Awami League that they have banned an Islamist party. And beyond that, let me ask you, India has BJP, right? It is, by their own definition, Hindu nationalist party, right? They are not making a separation between religion and politics, are they? So why that is expected that Bangladeshis will have to do it?
I don't.
If there's a fair election,
just for a quick clarification, I don't think the BJP refers to itself as a Hindu nationalist party. It doesn't refer to itself as a Hindu nationalist party.
Hindu nationalist party.
Sorry?
No, is it not? Am I making a mistake here?
No, that I'm just making, when you say that the BJP calls itself a Hindu nationalist party, it doesn't. I'm just pointing out a factual point over
fine.
there. But I see the point that you're making.
It doesn't call themselves Islamist.
But it's a fair point that you're making, and this is maybe where Professor Datta can come in, because just to expand on what you were saying, Professor Riaz, for example, India has been accusing Bangladesh recently of not being able to protect the interests of minorities, right? Particularly when it comes to Hindus. But then it is also a documented fact in India as well that the condition of when it comes to Muslims within India under BJP rule, they haven't fared any better. I mean, they have also faced a number of attacks as well. So I think the point goes both ways. How would you view India's thinking on that front?
In the immediate context, of course, we saw that there was a huge outbreak of violence. There was complete, breakdown of law and order. So while many were attacked, Hindus were also a large chunk of majority. But I've also argued, and I think Professor Riaz is aware of that even during Hasina's time, the minorities have always had an issue within the government, within the state. I've done some work on the Sundarban areas, and I've seen how several families have given their daughters who are above 16 years old into families into the Indian borders, because they always felt the girl, once she's come of a certain age, is not safe, because there is a tendency amongst others, there's a whole lot of muscling power. We also know that minorities are targeted because of their property and those kind of issues. And in general, there has been for decades, it's not new in Bangladesh, that there has been a steady onslaught on the minorities who've been. But again, I would also add here, this is the first time in history of Bangladesh, and correct me if I'm wrong, that I've actually seen Hindus come out in full strength on the streets of Dhaka. So clearly there has been some kind of a strengthening of that position, because it's not the first time that the Hindus have felt backlash in Bangladesh. So, but at this point of time, but then again, and I again have argued in several places that the interim Professor Yunus himself, student leaders have certainly come out against that kind of violence against the minorities, and they did offer and did physically try and support them and give them cover. So all of that did take place, yes. But again, steadily we've seen through the years and through the last 1 year, because of the breakdown of law and order, there has been a kind of a periodic attack that we've seen continues to happen on against the minorities.
I just want to come in with a few comments that we're getting in our chat. Maths Enthusiast says there was a genuinely secular faction in that revolution, so talking about Bangladesh last summer, who sincerely wanted a fairer, more equitable system, but they're rapidly being silenced by Islamists associated with, and this person mentions various groups. So that was one comment that perhaps after this we could get a reaction from you, Professor Riaz. And then we've had another couple of comments. H. Hasib says, India and Bangladeshi people are friends by soul, but because of both Modi and Hasina, we are becoming enemies. And World Politics and Sport says, Sheikh Hasina's regime was favouring Indian interests over Bangladesh by destroying Bangladesh's sovereignty. So those are just three of the comments. We've had quite a few that are in our chat. And maybe I could just ask you, Professor Riaz, to react to that comment, the first one that I said from Maths Enthusiast, saying that, you know, there was a secular faction massively involved in those student protests last summer, but they have now been overtaken, which is what I think we were discussing just before I brought these comments in. Do you have a comment to that?
Sure. First of all, it's a popular uprising which was participated by a wide spectrum of people. They're coming from different, with different political persuasion, right? You can call them left, you can call them right, you can call them centrist, because it was a popular uprising. And the students who started this movement on the quota reform, which then spread because of the pent-up anger of last 14, 15 years. So were there Islamists? Of course they were Islamists, if we call them an Islamist. But why we're trying to put this in a binary of Islamist versus secularist? I mean, that is something problematic. This is very problematic of putting this through this lens, because who do I actually say secularist in the context of particularly the situation that we are talking about, 2024 or the last 15 years, right? Let's take the last regime. Would we call them a secularist when they're making compromises with the conservative, quote-unquote, Islamist forces? Yet, a lot of people love to call the Hasina's regime as a secularist. I don't. Because if you look at their credentials, Islamization, if that is good, bad, that's subjective. But that has happened under her watch. That has happened. Also, she had been very much using this idea that she's battling the Islamist militants to silence the opposition, justifying a regime which is nothing but personalistic autocracy, justifying entire so-called development paradigm, which is nothing but kleptocracy. Because she's secular. She's claiming that it is a battle between secularists and Islamists, despite the fact that she's authoritarian, yet she's protecting the secular credential. This is problematic. That's why this binary, anyone who is trying to put the binary as secular versus Islamist, is very problematic in this. With respect to 2024 popular uprising, it was participated by people from all walks of life. So some of them very conservative. Yes, of course. Are some of them very radical on both ends. You know, if you call it left radicalism, call it right, they were. Because it is a popular uprising. It's not one party driven, ideology driven, that this is, it was not. Not a single political party was at these, steering wheel, so to speak, of this movement. It was a spontaneous movement. Some of the post-5th of August situation, even today, a year later, what we are seeing, there are two reasons. One, we're talking about the law and order situation, right? It has improved, but it hasn't got to the situation. For 15 years, you have politicized the police in such a manner that either they're fled, still loyal, or they're fearful that they're loyalty.
We seem to be having audio problems with your connection, Professor Riaz. Can you hear us? Because right now you're frozen for us as well. I think we're going to try and work on that. Can I just make a request to both of you? There's lots to say, but just for the sake of brevity, if you can just keep our answers slightly short, then you can cover a bit more ground. Professor Datta, you wanted to come in, I think,
sure.
When Professor Riaz was making a point about the binary way in which one is looking at it, maybe one should not be looking at it in that fashion. Professor Datta.
So during, I agree to what the changes were during even Awami League's time. Hifazat was a partner for a while. So all of that was happening. Several other, we know about madrasas, mosques and all of that. But what we have now seen, apart from all the kind of violence that took place against Mujib's house, his, the whole historical legacy, that apart, we've seen many public meetings which are now, there in the public domain by several religious political parties and religious groups who are extremely stridently anti-woman. I mean, there's the kind of language they're using about women participating in any of these, they're saying, if there's a woman in this particular meeting, please throw them out. And I mean, the kind of, verbal violence one gets to hear about women and their role in society and politics or state is something we've not heard in Bangladesh earlier, which has given way to the, a popular understanding that the Islamists out there in full force.
Professor Datta, sorry to interject here. I'm not saying that therefore it is okay to sort of say these things against women, but the ruling BJP in India, members of the ruling BJP have also been called out within India for making very highly inflammatory anti-women comments. I mean, it is something that extends to India as well. So I'm just wondering why that is particularly a problem in Bangladesh.
The kind of things that we've heard in BJP, and you've also seen the leadership has come down on it. I haven't seen any interim government or any of the advisors say that much of that was happening is acceptable or not acceptable. There is pretty much silence about it. In the recent case, we've also seen in Bengal a particular leader also say something on a very grotesque incident that happened, a very anti-woman. I'm not saying it doesn't happen in India, but that doesn't, one wrong doesn't make the other one right? I'm just saying this is something in Bangladesh we hadn't seen earlier. We hadn't seen this kind of an anti-woman positioning in the public domain. Maybe they felt it inside. Maybe there was a domestic situation. But out there in full strength in public domain, and they're not scared to say these things. And nobody's telling them to keep quiet or, tone it down.
Can I just just deviate a bit, because I see this a lot in the chat that is running alongside this live stream, Professor Riaz and Professor Datta. It's about the historical context here, and it's something that, for example, Subhash Marti, one of our users, was asking me to sort of delve into. I'm not going to be able to go into a rabbit hole on this, but basically the history when it comes to Sheikh Hasina and her father and India. And I wonder if both of you could indulge me on this and just give me quick answers on this one. Sheikh Hasina's father was Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, the founding president of Bangladesh. He led the Bangladeshi independence movement in 1971, became the founding president, was assassinated in 1975 by people of the Bangladesh army. In fact, on the 15th of August, India's Independence Day in 1975, he was assassinated. Help me understand this, Professor Riaz, and maybe we have the images of this as well. This is, I think, from the 5th of August last year, when a statue of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman was being pulled down. Those are the images there, was being pulled down by people in Dhaka. Professor Riaz, help me understand this. Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, revered in Bangladesh, the founding president of Bangladesh, his statue was being vandalized in this fashion. What does that, how do we interpret this? Why was this happening? Professor Riaz, can you hear me, sir? Professor Riaz, can you hear me, sir?
I think he's frozen.
I think that line is frozen. Professor Riaz, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear. There are a little. Yeah, I can hear you, but there was a little bit of interruption in between.
Yeah, could you hear my question?
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you and see you. Could you hear my question?
Yes, I could. I mean, you were asking about why Sheikh Mujibur, who, according to you, has been revered now, his statue was vandalized and taken down. Why that happens?
Yeah.
Is that the question?
Yeah, that was it. Yeah. Yes, please.
So the reason is this. First of all, Sheikh Mujib's idea of the state, Sheikh Mujib, in his first Sheikh Mujib between 72 and 75 created a one-party state. Let us not forget that part. We need to recollect it. We should not stop Sheikh Mujib about Sheikh Mujib in 1971 or 72.
Right.
He became the prime minister in 72, then switched to presidential form without the consent of the people, turned this country into one-party state, right? That is the ideology he pursued 72, 75. Of course, his assassination, brutal assassination, is not something I'm going to condone. And that is absolutely unacceptable. But that part you cannot forget, right? That's number one.
Mm-hmm.
Second thing is, this is a replica of Mujib's one party, what Sheikh Hasina was trying to do. Mujib tried and succeeded in de jure one-party state. Sheikh Hasina, over the years, have done the same thing, de facto one-party state, by brutally suppressing the opposition. Second thing, justification of her rule has always been tied to her father, as if this is something that Sheikh Mujib has created. Nobody else has any role in the movement in the 1960s, the nationalist movement. Where is Maulana Bashani's contribution? Or for that matter, even during the 1971 war. Mm-hmm. It is not Sheikh Mujib who was leading from the front. It is Tajuddin Ahmed and others. So justifying the authoritarian regime by Sheikh Hasina on the argument that she is fulfilling the dream of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman.
Okay.
So people reacted to it. They cannot have the one-party state second version justifying it because Sheikh Mujib was the leader of the nationalist movement.
Right. Okay. Well, thanks for that important context. I'd just like to move this along a bit because we wanted to talk about what many are calling Bangladesh's new foreign policy. I don't know if it is indeed the foreign policy. You will have a better idea, Professor Riaz. But essentially, Bangladesh turning to China and Pakistan, which is not to say that there wasn't any contact with China and Pakistan earlier. There was contact with China and Pakistan. Before I come to that, I just wanted to play a soundbite from Chief Advisor, Interim Leader, Mohammad Yunus. He was speaking to Deutsche Welle just a few months after the 5th of August last year. And he said a particular thing when it came to the relationship with India. I'd like to play that soundbite first and then ask a follow-up question on that.
India is not only the biggest neighbor, it's the only neighbor. Because India is all around us. So of all the countries in the world, Bangladesh must have the best of relationship with India, out of its own necessity and out of its own acquaintances and the similarity of the things that we do together. We share each other's history. So there's no escape route for Bangladesh to do something else.
So Bangladesh should have the best of relations with India, Professor Riaz. Yet, when it comes to relations currently, it is anything but best of relations. You've had Mr. Yunus having met the Pakistan Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, having visited China on an official trip, met President Xi Jinping, and met all these gentlemen before meeting Prime Minister Modi, whom he meets on the sidelines of a summit in Bangkok in April. Can you help us understand what the thinking here is from Bangladesh?
From Bangladesh has never stopped thinking that they need to have a better relationship with India. Mm-hmm. But it has never been reciprocated in the manner that it should be between two states. Rather than the relationship with India, New Delhi was with one person, one party, one regime. That is Sheikh Hasina's. Okay. Because of this unequal relationship. So does Bangladesh want to have a better relationship with India? Of course, with dignity. With dignity. That's the point. It cannot be a subservient to India's interest that they pursue. That's the point. So when Professor Yunus spoke of having a good relationship, he is not wrong. He's absolutely correct. Bangladesh want a relationship. You cannot simply wash away the fact that Bangladesh is practically surrounded by India. However, one thing we need to understand from the Indian New Delhi's should remember that there is something called a Bay of Bengal. There is a door for Bangladesh there too. So thinking that it is being surrounded by India, it will have to always be, countering the idea of India. That's problematic. That's what is creating this problem now.
Professor Datta, do you see a level of condescension in the way India has dealt with Bangladesh, and not so much Bangladesh, as Professor Riaz is saying, essentially one person and not the country, and India should have done a better job of caring for this relationship?
As I said earlier, I think India does not kind of give the importance that an interim government needed at that point of time. And we've heard Professor Yunus, not only to Deutsche Welle, but to BBC and elsewhere, talk about it. But also, on the contrary, we also heard Professor Yunus, go to China and talk about Lal Moniar Haat and have an air base, which is, again, as I said, the security issue is really the bugbear between the two neighbors. He also talked about Bay of Bengal, and they are the only ones who have access to Bay of Bengal, which is a factually incorrect statement. So, and the fact that we've seen, and there's a history to it, right, as to why Pakistan has never been allowed to come closer. And Pakistan, that issue of apology and all of that is still on the table for Bangladesh. And I also do understand that Pakistan is very keen to show to the entire world and South Asia how close they are to Bangladesh. And I don't think India was enjoying the fact that ISI members were being taken all over, closer to India's border, and, kind of propped around. So there were many other many layers which were affecting India, but it's true that India was extremely, and I continue to say this, extremely indifferent to Yunus's government and to many of the other leaders who tried to reach out to, which I find it unfathomable, really, because, I do agree it is Bangladesh's choice who they usher in and who they want, and I don't see how any sovereign nation should actually have but again, yes.
But, you're talking about the interim government right now. There's an interim government right now, but then the relationship with Bangladesh has not been defined just by this interim government. You talk about security as an issue. Let me give you another parallel example. The issue of water sharing, right? India and Bangladesh is something like 54 transboundary rivers that both countries share, yet there is just one agreement between them, the Ganga Waters Agreement, that expires this year, or is it next year? I think it expires this year. It was a 30-year agreement. It expires in 2026, so next year. It expires next year. When it comes to the Teesta River, for example, Bangladesh has been wanting an agreement on that. There was the issue of India investing. First, India did not want to invest in the Teesta River project. Then China started to put up the money, and then India said, "Oh, okay, we want to invest as well." That's not the way to deal with these kind of issues, right? For example, rivers are very important to Bangladesh because Bangladesh is downstream when it comes to most of these rivers, and a significant part of the population depends on this. So, that also goes to show that India has not been paying attention, right?
I agree, and again, I've written about this in several occasions about how water is the most emotive issue between the two neighbors, and India has completely ignored it at their own peril. And I don't understand why India is doing that, because as upper riparian, we understand the lower riparian's concerns. We are also lower riparian in some cases, so we do and I'm not
with respect to China, for example,
why India has ignored. Yes, exactly. And why India has ignored the concerns, and quite obvious concerns. I have no denial of that. Also, the border issue that Professor Riaz talked about, and I think no true civilized neighbors should have border shootouts. It's a ridiculous concept in this days and time. But again, we've not been able to, even during the best of ties and best of relation, unfortunately, the neighbors were not able to resolve this issue. We still have border push-outs and push-ins, which are ridiculous between two neighbors who've always been great partners. See, there will be ups and downs in a bilateral relationship, but there's certain parameters which needs to be in place. Unfortunately, despite the fact that India and Bangladesh worked so closely during the last 14 years, I think the certain parameters were not set in place.
I'd just like to come in with a few comments that are in our chat again. First of all, thank you particularly to Anderson and to Nile, who have been very succinctly explaining some of the history of where we are in South Asia, how we got to Bangladesh from East Pakistan, also involving the British. So they've done a very good summary, I would say, because it is complicated. So thank you to them. Some of these comments then coming in from Loving Soul, first of all. in fact, Vivek Kumar, I'm going to go with first, who says it seems like Bangladesh would like to maintain relationships with China and Pakistan, whilst also having the same with India, but it seems that India doesn't appreciate, or doesn't seem to appreciate that. So that's what Vivek is saying. And Loving Soul is saying now Bangladesh seems more close to Pakistan than India, and that's despite the history, of course. Don't forget, India liberated Bangladesh from Pakistan. So again, going back into the history there. So just some of those comments about where Bangladesh is going now with its relationship, not just with India, but also with China and with Pakistan. And we haven't mentioned Turkey yet either, have we?
Well, let's just stick with China and Pakistan. We've got Professor Riaz, I think, might want to come in on this one. Are you hedging your bets? Is Bangladesh hedging its bets against India?
See, let me just put two things here. I mean, the very notion that India has liberated Bangladesh is actually an affront to the people who fought 25 years against Pakistan, fought a war. It was a people's war. It started on 25th of March, 1971. It's not a war that started on the 3rd of December when India intervened. We need to take that into account. Bangladesh has liberated itself. India helped in this regard. That is how the history should be mentioned. But anyway, so this is just a correction to the common perception that might actually have influenced the relationship between India and Bangladesh. On the issue of relationship with China, Pakistan, and India, as an independent country, a sovereign country, Bangladesh should determine what is in its best interest to have relationship with other countries. We were talking about the Ganges River Treaty, right? But the water sharing, even under the Ganges Treaty, it was not properly administered. Bangladesh didn't receive the amount of water it was supposed to receive over the years. Look, there is a joint river commission. How many times that have met under Hasina's government? How many times? 1, 2, 3, 4? No. Just for almost a decade, there was no meeting of the JRC. That's the fact. So, 54 rivers, one treaty, 25 years ago. And all this time, when we talk about the Tista River only, but there are 54 rivers.
Right.
What happened to those? Why there isn't any? And we haven't talked about the trade relationship and the investment and the agreements. One is just one. Let me mention the name Adani, how the agreement was made and what it actually means for Bangladesh. Very, very unfortunate.
I just want to sort of expand, take it a bit more forward, because I wanted to sort of play for both of you, rather sort of highlight what India's current External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar had to say in February earlier this year. He was talking about the relationship between both countries. I'll come to you, Professor Riaz, for a reaction on this. I suspect it's going to be an interesting one. This is what this is what Mr. Jaishankar said, and I quote, "You cannot on the one hand say that I would now like to have good relations with you, but I wake up every morning and blame you for everything that goes wrong. They must make up their minds on what kind of relationship they want to have with New Delhi going forward." Professor Riaz, what is the thinking in Dhaka when it comes to the relationship with India going forward?
If you could put it up again on the screen, and I can change just two words. And just
we'll put it up again. We'll put it up again. Right. Yeah, there you go.
Right. On the one hand, say that I would not like to have good relationship with you, but I wake up every morning and blame you for everything that goes wrong. Security question that India has always blamed Bangladesh as if everything other than Bangladesh is absolutely fine. Kashmir is fine, Northeast India is fine, other places are absolutely fine. There is no problem in India. It is all Bangladesh's problem because Bangladesh is harboring the militants, right? Isn't that the security argument India was making for years? So you have to make up a mind. Put it again, and I can read it again for you.
No,
It
we
is
can,
not
we can put it up
Bangladesh.
again. What does Dhaka want to do?
No. I mean, when Mr. Jaishankar is saying it now, I can put it in the last 10 years and say I would now like to have a good relationship with you, but I'm not going to give you water. I would kill your people on the border. My trade relationship would be unequal. And then anything that goes wrong in Northeast India or in Kashmir, it is all Bangladesh security problem, right? New Delhi must make up their mind on what kind of relationship they want to have with Dhaka going forward. Same goes here. Same goes today. New Delhi have to make up its mind as to what kind of relationship they want to have it. When they are practically not responding to, you played the tape of Professor Yunus, right?
Right.
How forthcoming Bangladesh should be? How forthcoming do you want Bangladesh to be?
No, can you just spell it out for us?
This is the only one.
Just a few things. Firstly, India is not saying that everything is Bangladesh's fault. That is not what is implicit in that statement. Because when it comes to, for example, the trouble in the Northeast, you know that, for example, the Indian Army carried out raids in Myanmar as well. That is also there. But I just want to know, since you're sitting in Dhaka and you have this vantage point, just help us understand, how does Dhaka want to take this forward? And we'll come to the Indian part. I'll go to Professor Datta as well.
It has to be decided in New Delhi as to what kind of relationship. Harboring someone like Sheikh Hasina, allowing her continuously inciting, instructing her own followers to engage in violence, and continuously threatening that she would come and take revenge, and doing nothing when it was reported to them. The disinformation campaign that has been launched and continue with respect to Bangladesh situation by Indian media. It is not only the government, the Indian civil society and the Indian media should take some responsibility as well. You know, that when there was a popular uprising in Sri Lanka, did they say that this is an illegitimate government? The very notion, the mindset is problematic. From Bangladesh part of view, I'm not representing the government, so I cannot speak for Bangladesh government, but I can speak at least as someone in Bangladesh, in terms of the citizens of Bangladesh. They expect to have a better relationship, but relationship has to be dignified relationship. It should be a state-to-state relationship. There should not be this kind of understanding that without Sheikh Hasina, the Bangladesh is going to go down the drain. No. It is not.
Okay. Let's get Professor Datta's... Let's get Professor Datta's response on that. I mean, that sounds pretty reasonable, right? Professor Datta, a dignified relationship and a relationship beyond just a person and a party.
I totally agree with that, and I would actually think, and if there's some kind of assurance that Bangladeshi soil is not going to be used against India, I actually feel that a relationship will now actually be on equal terms. It won't be as if there's a one-way traffic as how it was perceived for the last few years. So now, when elected government comes in and there is kind of convey of intention and interest from both sides, the equitable relationship will actually full out right now, which is, we've always talked about how leaders work well together, government works well together, but for India and Bangladesh, it was always people to people. Somehow along the way, we lost that. And I think this is the time to recapture that. And, let's forget what has happened. Bangladesh seems Indian government has announced election. So I don't expect India to change its stance in the next few months. Latest election date is April. So I'm hoping that once elections take place, India and Bangladesh will calm down, settle itself, and then, work like two partners, not as what Professor Riaz had alluded to, that it was a one-way traffic. And I agree, there has been a perception about that. And irrespective of who's in Dhaka, we should be able to work with that, because I think it's not only Professor Yunus. I think most thoughtful leaders in Bangladesh believe that India and Bangladesh working together is beneficial for both sides. It's not only a one-way side.
Professor Riaz, elections are scheduled for April. Go on. You make a quick point, then I'll come to one.
Why that has to be contingent on an elected government? Why that is contingent? When the next government comes, there will be a better relationship. Why not tomorrow? What is the problem with the Yunus government? It is not elected.
I'm just saying. I'm following the trend that I'm not forever supporting India, and I think I don't need to make big noise about that. That I completely find India's position unfathomable, really. But I'm just saying I don't think India is going to change its stance in the next 4 or 5 months. That's the way I see it. It hasn't for the last 1 year. I don't expect anything, to change drastically. There should be business as usual mode, and I'm not again. I'm totally. I've been very vocal about the trade measures that were taken away and things like that. But I'm just saying that India probably has its sight on a free and fair, kind of a pluralist situation.
Just to be clear, we don't view either of you as speaking for in the Indian or the Bangladeshi government. But Professor Riaz, it is a fact that you are working closely with the current interim one. And with that in mind, with elections having been set for April next year, will this involve all parties, you reckon? Because you are talking to all these other parties right now. Do you reckon this will involve all parties, or how will this election play out?
The election date has not been set, so it could be February, it could be April. Definitely what Professor Yunus has insisted, it won't go beyond June. That's what he has promised. So sometime I presume between February and April, sometime it will take place, definitely not beyond June. We're talking with the political parties who have been, engaged in the democratic movement over the last 15, 16 years, who have not been part of a regime which has openly perpetrated violence, massacres, and decimated democratic institutions, decimated the electoral system that we have seen, right? So will that be an election? We expect this election to be participatory. People would, I hope, there would be an election which people can vote, which they couldn't in a fair election since 2008. It has been 17 years that Bangladeshis couldn't get an opportunity to vote in a free, fair manner. We hope that would take place. That is what we expect, or at least I expect that should take place.
Okay, I'm just going to close it up here. Thank you both for joining us. As I understand, Professor Datta, you were joining us from Kolkata, and Professor Riaz, you're joining us from Dhaka. If we go back all the way to 1905 till 1905, they were all part of the same administrative region before it was split into, and then now you have Bangladesh and India, but both people speaking a similar language and understanding each other. Thanks so much, both of you, for joining us today, Professor Riaz from Dhaka and Professor Datta from Kolkata, and thanks for clearing up some of those issues. Thanks so much. Have a good evening, both of you. I think we're gonna sort of close up the stream right now, but not immediately.
We've had some very interesting comments. There was quite a debate going on in the chat, I think it's fair to say, between those who are pro-India and those who are pro-Bangladesh.
There's a lot of
surprising that.
There's a lot of anger among people in Bangladesh towards Sheikh Hasina. There's very, very deep anger.
Yeah, but the sad thing about this is it becomes such as this whole anti-India, pro-India, anti-Bangladesh, pro-Bangladesh kind of a narrative. It misses the wider point that there are serious issues at play here, and that's what we were sort of trying to discuss in this conversation.
One comment that's just come in from Udin Nazim. Bangladeshi people, this is controversial, don't want elections now because we need Professor Yunus.
I think there'll be some political parties that will disagree with that, particularly the army, who is saying that, OK, we need to have elections as soon as possible, but, well, elections sometime next year. We have a result of the poll, potentially?
We do. And just before we do, want to thank again to people like Neelay and Anderson who've been giving everyone, a lot of context today, because it is a context-heavy discussion, and we want to thank you so much for doing that. We have the results of our poll, and so we asked you at the beginning of the stream what you think the first step to better ties between India and Bangladesh would be. In first place, 42% that think that India should extradite Sheikh Hasina, or that they think doing so would result in better ties between the two countries. and 28% that minorities would be safer in Bangladesh. Number 3, deeper economic ties on 12%. And I've flipped it around. So 18% of you think that relations are permanently damaged, so that there is no opportunity for better ties. And finally, in 4th place, 12% think that their deeper economic ties would result in better relations between the two countries. So
18% thinking that it's irreparable.
Yeah,
That's
so
quite
nearly a
hefty
fifth.
number.
Exactly. So, yeah, but most people think that if India did, in fact, extradite the former Bangladeshi Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina to Bangladesh to face the charges that she's accused of, that would result in better ties. So thank you, everyone, for your weigh-in today.
I'd say as expected. And before we sort of close up, just a quick little weigh-in from me. My grandmother is originally from Dhaka. And she had to, unfortunately, along with the rest of her family, leave Dhaka in 1948 and come to India. So, in a sense, you're looking at me, I'm a product of India and Bangladesh as well. So, It's been a great pleasure having this discussion.
That.
Yeah, save the best for last. I don't know
really
if it's the best or not.
You really
but
did.
Yeah. No, thanks so much, everybody, for being a part of this discussion, and to all our regulars who were providing context. I hope you enjoyed the discussion. I certainly had a great time talking about it. Thanks, Jared, so much.
You're welcome.
Jared, thank you, who's very busy in the chat there as well.
For interacting with everybody.
So thank you. And just to remind you all that you can check out what we're going to talk about next week, so next Wednesday, on the day before, on Tuesday, where we will put up our community post. We really hope that you will join us and check out what we will be discussing next week. Thanks again for joining us today.
See you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.